Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how you can create your own Gecko strategy. Gecko is a quite big trading system. However, whether you will make or lose money all depends on your strategy because Gecko is it only follows up the advice of your strategy. So when your strategy says you should buy, that's when Gecko actually does the buying, and the same for the selling, meaning that all your results are going to depend on your strategy. So it's very, very important that you have a good one that you feel confident about before you run it in production with real money. So before we can actually go ahead with this video, it's important that we have a few things straight. The first one being that you need to understand some core concepts of Gecko. The idea of Gecko is that it takes away of a lot of knowledge required to run a trading system, but you still need to be aware of what type of system Gecko is and specifically what it optimizes for. Fortunately, I made a video about this exact thing a few weeks ago. You can find the link down below in the description. And that video will go over exactly what a strategy should aim for within Gecko and how Gecko evaluates strategies in simulation environments. And then the last thing that you're going to need is you're going to have need a basic understanding of programming JavaScript. So this is a little bit more technical video. If you are not very technical, like feel free to stick around. You might learn a thing here or two about how Gecko does things and how Gecko works under the hood. But you're only actually going to benefit from this video if you are familiar with JavaScript and if you feel comfortable scripting it yourself. So it's either mean writing it from scratch or just copying, pasting, and tweaking some stuff you find around the internet. And in this video, we're going to start very basic and build up from that. Okay, so the first thing you need to understand about Gecko is that Gecko, together with a strategy, they basically look at the market similar to a charting website. So this is CryptoWatch. So just to be clear, Gecko is not a charting tool, but it behaves similar to a charting tool when Gecko works together with a strategy. Because what you can see here you can see candles, right? So these are all the red or the green bars. And if you're not familiar with candles, like please read up with them because they're quite important to understand when you're dealing with strategies, because that is all that Gecko will give your strategy. So the idea is that your strategy is a very simple script or simple file. Gecko will put in market data, it will give candles, and then your strategy is going to look at these candles and potentially also look at some other factors like indicators that are run over these candles. And then your strategy is going to have some logic built in that's going to decide, based on what I see now in the market, we're going to buy or we're going to sell. So it's quite similar to Gecko being a charting website like this, where then there's someone looking at the charts and then deciding what to do. So that someone is the strategy, and the charting platform is basically Gecko, including a way to then actually go ahead and buy or sell. Another very important thing to note about candles is that right now they are set to 1 minute, meaning that every bar is basically 1 minute of market activity, which means that the whole screen is like, how much is this? 3 hours, a little bit more. Whereas if we change these candle size to like say 5 minutes, it's not just that right now the screen is about a lot more. It's not just 3 hours anymore. It's a lot more hours. How many is this? 12 or something? 14 hours. Also, the candles, they look different, right? Because the market behaves differently depending on how far you are, like how close you are looking at it. If you're looking at like minute to minute activity, you're going to see very different things than if you look at daily activity, right? So we can even set them here. We can set the candles to 1 day, and that again is going to look very different, right? So we also have this in Gecko, and with how it works with Gecko is that you can say to Gecko, I want to run this strategy over candles of a certain size, right? So which would be similar to changing this from 1 minute to say 5 minutes or 1 hour, and then have the person who is looking at the screen make different types of decisions, right? Let's get started. So what I've done here is I have Gecko installed in a folder called Gecko Strategy Tutorial, and I've already installed all the dependencies. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have some local data. So we can do that quite easily by importing it through the Gecko UI. So if you type in our terminal node space gecko space dash UI, Gecko will start the user interface, which we'll only be using in this video for importing and managing data. But we will run our simulations while we are developing the strategy through the command line, because I found that to be that works quite handy. So under local data, if you just installed Gecko and you don't have any data yet, you can quite easily import it. So under local data, you go to the importer at the bottom. And let's say in this strategy, we want to develop a strategy for Binance, and we want to run it over their dollar Bitcoin market. So on default, this is the last 3 months. So if you go ahead and click import here, Gecko will now actually go and fetch all this market data from Binance. It's going to take a while because Binance has rate limits, so Gecko cannot just ask for gigabytes of market data. But after that is done, I have already done it. You will have local data, which you can see here by going back to local data and clicking on scan available data. You can now see, okay, there's one data set of 2 months and 1 week on Binance dollar Bitcoin. This is what we will be using to develop our strategy. Okay, so let's get started with the code. So I opened up the whole project here, the whole Gecko folder. First thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the sample config, and we're going to copy everything, and we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it config.js, and we're going to paste everything in there. So now let's save it again. And you don't have to really tweak around a lot with this file at all, unless you change the market. So I choose for Binance dollar Bitcoin, which is the default in the sample config. But if you went for something else, then go ahead and change that right here. And then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to specify our strategy. And we're going to create a strategy in a second, and we're going to call it Moon. So we're going to already configure that in our config. And as for candle size, so this is at what resolution strategy will look at the market. So on default, it's set for 60, which means 60 minutes, which is the same as 1 hour. But just to keep things simple for now, let's set it to daily candles, which is the same as zooming all the way out. And as we saw before with Gecko, I have 2 months of data. So if we set it to daily, we should get roughly 60 candles in our strategy, right? So daily is hourly times 24, since there are 24 hours in a day. So if you go ahead and save this file, let's just try to run a Gecko simulation and see what happens. So we're gonna kill the UI. We don't need it anymore. And then we're gonna type node gecko dash backtest. This indicates that we run a simulation over the 2 months of data that we have. This is just very easily backtest. Since you don't actually have to, every time we make a little tweak to our strategy, we don't have to wait an hour to gather all the data because we're just running a historical simulation. And then we need to pass a config, and we created our config.js file for this. So let's see what happens when we run this. It says, okay, shit, there's an error. Gecko can't find the strategy Moon. That's because we haven't created it yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside our strategies folder, we're going to create a new file. And we're going to call it moon.js. So this will be our whole strategy file. Everything as to our strategy will be defined in this one file and this one file only, and everything else is just Gecko making sure your strategy has whatever it needs, like has all the candles, has all the indicator results if your strategy requires those. Okay, so an easy starting point is, yeah, we closed the UI, so it's not working anymore, is to go to the creating a strategy page. You can find the link in the description. And then we're just going to copy this boilerplate into our moon.js file. So let's save it. Let's go ahead and run this file. Okay, so there's no error anymore. That's good because it's running our strategy. So we can see here setting up Gecko in backtest mode, setting up trading advisor using the strategy moon. So this is our strategy. And then it's scanning for the local data that will be used for this backtest, and it found the 2 months that we have stored. And then nothing happens anymore. And that's because our strategy doesn't do anything. So Gecko, it can't really simulate anything because the strategy didn't say anything. Okay, so let's have a look at this file. So we see this is a JavaScript file. First it creates an object called strat, and then it puts a few functions inside this object. So there's an init function, an update function, a log function, a check function, and an end function. So these are different functions, part of your strategy that Gecko will take, and Gecko will actually run them. But as you can see, there are only comments inside the strategies and no actual code, which is why Gecko isn't doing anything. So whenever you're working with Node, a very handy function is a console log, which will automatically print to the terminal. So if you're running this in terminal, it makes it very easy because you can just very quickly console log something to debug the output and then run a backtest like this and then see it actually appear. Yeah, so this is our previous backtest. And this is our latest backtest. And the only difference you can see is that here it says hello world. So this means that Gecko has actually executed this whole JavaScript file. And let's actually log all the functions. So inside all the functions, let's log the function name so that we can get and actually let's remove all the comments here, so that we can get an understanding of what it's doing with these functions. Because Gecko is actually executing them. Okay, so the only thing I added is I am logging the general file right here, and then every function, whenever this function is executed, and Gecko will do that, we're not going to do anything except for logging. So let's run this and see what happens. Oh, that's a lot of stuff. So we can see here it's logging 3 things. It's going to log a lot of, oh, here at the end it logged end, which is our final function. So this is a function that Gecko calls at the end of a simulation. It's not really important unless you have some stuff that you need to clean up. So if you have some connection or some stream open to some external service or something, then this is a place you could clean it up. But we're not going to do that in this tutorial, so let's just remove it. There's a log function. Let's also remove that because while we're testing, we'll simply use console log. The log function is used for strategies that are already live, but they want to give more insight into what's happening under the hood. So not really during development, but during production. So we're just going to remove it for now. And then there's an update and a check function. We're going to put all our logic inside our check function for now. So we can also remove this one. So we basically just deleted a bunch of code and we are only left with 2 functions, an init one and a check one. So let's see what happens this time. It didn't crash. It says here, hello world and init. So you can see that this function is ran straight away. And this as well. So let's remove this one keep in it here, and then it run check a bunch of times. So this check function of your strategy, Gecko will execute it a lot of different times. Basically, every time whenever there's a new candle. So the way you can visualize this in your head, if this is the chart and this is also the simulation, Gecko will go through this step by step, so to say. So in the beginning of the simulation, everything to the right of the cursor is the future. This hasn't happened yet, right? And your strategy right now at the green candle needs to decide based on this green candle, should I buy or should I sell? And as we can see, but we have an unfair perspective because we can see the future, right, from this point. We can see that the price has gone up after this point. So it were to have been good for the strategy to sell, but the strategy doesn't know this, right? Because the strategy only knows everything on the cursor and to the left of it, which is the history. And which is the same, like if you look at it from this perspective, right? Like if we right now want to make a decision on what to do, we don't really know what happens in the future yet, unfortunately. It would be good, but that's not how it works. So we need to make all our decisions based on what we have now and what we know at this very moment and the history. So you could say, for example, well, it's been going down and then it's been going up and so maybe it will go up some more. That's the type of logic you will put in your strategy and specifically in your check function. So actually, let's just go ahead and remove these comments as well, just to keep everything concise. So basically, we can see that we have 11 lines of code right now. So we define an object called strat. We attach an init property to the object, which is a function which only logs init, and the same for check. And the behavior will be exactly the same because we just stripped out the comments. Okay, so we know that this check function here, this right here, it's being called every time there's a new candle, which in the simulation happens very quickly after each other. So we can actually see that by logging it. Because we get the candle, it's being passed to our check function. And using console log, we can just inspect this candle thing and see what it looks like. Okay, so now we don't just see the check anymore, but we also see an object. Let's go all the way to the bottom. And a lot of times. And it should have been logging this around 60 times because this check function is being run every day in a simulation that spans roughly 60 days, right? 2 months. And then we see, okay, so there's this object right here. So let's just go ahead and copy this and keep it in here. So we can say a candle is an object, I'm just actually going to put this in comments, like this. The formatting is so hard. It is a comment, so it doesn't really do anything except for helping us out while creating our strategy. So we can see here that this candle is a JavaScript object and has a bunch of properties. The first one being start. And start is a moment object representing the time that the candle started at, right? So which is, if we go back here, we zoom in a little bit and we look at one of these candles. If we look at this one here, you can see the date at the top right here, the July 24th. And that's represented here by the start moment. And then you can see open, high, low, close. So these are default properties of a candle. A candle, as this one right here, it will have open, high, low, close, and you can see that right here. This is open, high, low, close, and they define. So open means the price when the candle opened. Close is the price when the candle closed. So at the end of which in this case is the end of the 24th of July. Or actually, technically speaking, the 25th of July and then 8 o'clock in the morning. That's a day later because this one spans a day. And then the price was 8395.01. And there's also an H and an L, a high and a low. And that's the highest point of the candle. So what was the highest price during this day? And the lowest. the lowest price during this day. So those are open, high, low, close. And then there are some other ones, some additional ones. So VWP is the volume weighted price, which is the average price of the day. Not the average in the middle, but the average of what it was actually trading at if you take the volume into account. And this is all the volume, and these are all the amount of trades. So we know this now. And just to be sure, so this start here is a moment object. A moment is an external library that Gecko uses to work with dates. So I'm on momentjs.com, which is the documentation website for moment objects. And we can see here, if we want to display our moment, we can use this thing called the dot format. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's say we want to display the start a little bit better. So we can say candle.start, which is the moment object. And then we can say a dot format, which is a function. And now we're only logging the times of all the candles and not the whole candles anymore, like we can see here. So let's go ahead and run this. Yeah, now we can see that every time our check function executes, it logs the start of the candle, formatted quite nicely in a like human readable date notation. So to say, so we can see this thing runs every day and it starts at midnight. So this candle describes the 7th, the 28th, the 9th, go on, go on. Yeah. So this is basically the gist of Gecko, that a strategy is a simple script with a few functions, and then Gecko will execute those functions and pass it new updated market data as it happens. So in a backtest simulation environment, it will do this as fast as possible, which in this case is how fast can it load this data from a database. But if you want Gecko for live during a live environment and you have the config selected candle size 60 times 24, then it's only actually going to call this function once a day, right? Because we have configured in our config our candle size to be daily, right? Which meaning that our strategy is going to run over a daily candle time frame. Meaning that if we look at this, so how it will work is that it will basically the candles are already set to one day, and then the strategy would look at the chart for now, make a decision or make no decision about doing anything. It would then basically sleep for the rest of the day for 24 hours. And then it will look at the same chart again with one extra candle right here. But because this is a simulation, Gecko is able to just pump in data candles really fast. And your strategy can figure out what to do. So what your strategy can do, it can actually say to Gecko, go ahead and trigger some advice. So let's say for simplicity's sake that we're gonna buy on every even day and we're gonna sell at every uneven day. So even and uneven, a way to do that in moment is we have this start, which is a moment object, and we can format it and we can ask specifically for the day, which is the D here. So we can say, we can pass it a string. And now if we log it again, we can see here it's only actually logging the day of the month. So let's just say we're gonna say in our strategy we're gonna say var day is this thing, and then we're gonna say if day is even, and a way to check is even in programming is to check if you can do modulus 0. If you do modulus 2. If the remainder is 0, it's an even number. So let's just actually, this is not a total programming tutorial, but for the sake of completion, I will add this in. Day. So now if we run it again, so every day I'm logging the day. And this is a very simple check to see if it's even. Yeah, so as you can see now, I'm just gonna, so with Control C, you can very quickly stop it. So here you can see, so day 7 is not even, as you might know. Day 8 is even, and then it actually logged even, right? So here we added a very simple check to see if it's an even day. And imagine if that in even days you should buy Bitcoin. Just for the sake of example, this is not financial advice. Just for the sake of demoing how you can create a strategy, we can say buy, and if it's an uneven day, we can say sell. So a way to do this in Gecko is your strategy has access to this thing called this advice, where you can say what you want to do. So we want to go long is the same as buying, and we want to go short is the same as selling. So if we do it like this, then every day in our simulation, Gecko will give a candle to your strategy. Your strategy will check if the day of the candle is even. If the answer is yes, it's going to say, okay, Gecko, you should now buy. And in a simulation environment, these are all simulated buys and sells. So let's see what happens if we run this now. So now we can see a bunch of other stuff. Now we can see Gecko saying paper traded simulated a sell. Paper trader simulated a buy. So this is because we use the function disadvise. Gecko actually used those advices to simulate buys and sells using a simulation engine. And as we can see here, we let it run, and here we get a round trip report as well, because we did buys and sells, which Gecko groups into round trips. We can see them all listed here. And they were all a day of exposure, because on the even days we bought, and then the day later it was an uneven day and we sold again. So they all have an exposure of one day. And here we can see the profit of each round trip. It's not a very good strategy, so to see. Like sometimes you make 6%, but sometimes you lose 5.5%. Not a very sound investment strategy right here, but it demos it showcases a strategy quite well. So we can see here the time span of our simulation was 2 months. We started with 6.7K. We ended with 6.3K, so we lost 16%. Oh, actually, no, this is the market. Actually, we actually lost 10%. So we did better than the market by buying on even days and selling on uneven days. I'm not recommending you should do this, but yeah, let's just flip them and see what happens. Let's just say, okay, we want to sell at even days and we want to buy at uneven days, and let's see what happens in that case. So it's running our simulation, and now we can actually see that we lost 23%. So based on this very simple analysis, and this is just a joke, this is not financial advice, would be better to, or in the last 2 months, it would have been better to buy on even days. This is not statistics. This is just showcasing a strategy, right? Okay. So we don't actually want to do this. We actually want to look at some more advanced properties. So what we can do with Gecko, we can use indicators. So indicators. So let's have a look here, because most of these tools they also allow you to plot them. So let's actually let's see, where is it again? Yeah, let's plot an EMA. Okay, so now in this charting software, I added an EMA, and as you can see, we can see a bunch of lines that were added. And as you can see, this darker one here, it's not as smooth as the other. It's a lot more lagging. It's a lot more like it doesn't really behave very much. You have the blue line, which behaves a lot more than this one together with the price. And here's the orange one, which behaves the most. So what a lot of people do is they look at when these lines cross to figure out patterns, right? So you can see, well, because right here there was a reversion. Like here, all the lines cross each other basically. This is a sell moment. And then later here they cross again. This is a buy moment, right? And this would have been quite good because the price actually went down from here to here. But it's not always like that. And here you can see here we revert, so here we bought again, and here we would have sold again. So this is a very simple strategy would be to trade on these signals where these lines would cross. So let's do that with Gecko real easily. So Gecko can actually help you out with calculating these lines. So your strategy doesn't need to do that. Gecko will do it for you. And Gecko has, so let's have a look at the documentation. So under strategies, we can see Gecko Indicators. So Gecko actually has few indicators built in, but it also has some third-party libraries, low-level libraries that are industry standards when it comes to calculating these indicators, because these indicators are quite standard. They have been defined, I don't know, a few decades ago in some books, and right now everyone just uses them. So Gecko can calculate them, only a few. You can see the full list here. But if you want more, then you can use this external library. For example, Tulip or Talib is actually more familiar. So let's have a look at Talib here. And then you get access to all of these strategies, indicators, apologies. That's quite a long list. And then I think Tulip has even more. Anyway, there's a huge list of indicators you can use. So let's stick to the basic ones. No, actually, let's just go ahead and use a Tulip strategy, a Tulip indicator. First, you need to make sure that you have a Tulip installed, because this is an external library and it's a low level, so it needs to be compiled. So go ahead and run this command. I already did it, so I am just going to copy this in. Actually, let's just copy this into our strategy. So we need to do this in our init method, because we need to, at the beginning, we need to tell Gecko that we want to use something. So let's say we want an EMA. EMA, require parameters opt-in time period. And this is how much the line is lagging. So I don't know if we have it displayed here. Yeah, EMA. So we can see there are three. One is 10, one is 21, and one is 100. So we can just do that as well. We can say, so this is EMA 10. And then we can add another one. We can call it, which one did I? 21. And then there was one for 100. Wait, now I don't actually think that makes sense, because the backtest is too short. So given that the backtest is only 60 days, it doesn't really make sense. Okay, so now we have access, because we defined them over here in our check function. Gecko will automatically calculate these indicators. So we can say this. Let's see. Can probably find it here as well. This Tulip indicators and then the name. So let's just go ahead and have a look here. This Tulip indicators, and we call this one EMA 10. Let's call this. Actually, let's just log this whole thing and let's see what's inside on every check. Okay, let's do it. Oh, MACD, that's not MACD, this is EMA. Yeah, so if you see an error, before you go ahead and post an issue, please try to see if you can figure this out yourself, because in this situation it says MACD requires opt-in fast period, and it's at MACD because I had left that in here, which is a different indicator that requires different parameters. So I fixed that, and now we can run it again. Okay, so we can see here there's a bunch of stuff, but we're looking at the result for EMA 10 and 21. So we can say const EMA 10 is EMA 10 result, and I think it's actually double nested into this other thing called result. Okay, so now we're just logging them. So let's see what happens. Let's log both of them, EMA 20 and EMA 21. Yeah, this looks a little bit better. So we can see here that each line is still every time this check function runs, which right now is once a day in our simulation. And we can see here that we have different numbers. So we could say something like, okay, when they cross, we're going to do something. So let's say if the 10, which is the if we compare it to this one here, let's remove this 100. We don't want it anymore. We only have two now. So we can say the yellow one here is the 10 and the blue one here is the 21. So we can say if the yellow goes above the 21, we think the price will go up. Let's just see what, I'm not saying that will, but Gecko will help us figure that out, right? So we can say if EMA 10 is bigger than EMA 21, we want to do a buy, which is long, and else we want to do a short. And then we don't need to log them anymore, and let's just see what happens. Okay, so it's going to sell, it's going to buy. Ooh, exciting stuff. Okay, so I did 5 trades and a total of 2 round trips. But they were unfortunately not very profitable, as we can see. Like, did I flip them? Let's flip them and see what happens. Yeah, I think I flipped them. So this is a very simple trend watching trading bot that we have just created in literally like here. If I remove this comments, 20 lines of code using Gecko. And as we can see here, it made 2%, even though the market went down 16%. I'm not saying that this is a perfect strategy, you should always run it. It's just that if the market behaves in trends, and they can be daily trends, as you can see, because in the simulation of 2 months, you can see here that um, it only actually bought like twice and only sold twice in the duration of 2 months. And because it was able to pick these quite well in the round trip, and please make sure that you have watched the introduction video about Gecko to put that in perspective. But because we were able to just ride the trend a little bit, we didn't suffer the bear market, and we actually came out in positive. Um, yeah, so something else you can do is you can combine different indicators. So we can also say, why don't we add an RSI indicator? And the RSI, I think it only requires opt-in time period, but let's just double check that. RSI, yeah, requires opt-in time. So let's set this to, I don't know, to 15. So this video is not to show how you should use indicators. You should do your own research about that. But once you have done that, then this video shows how you can actually use them in a Gecko strategy. Yeah, so let's actually just log it for now. I'm actually not going to do anything with the result, but the idea is that you can incorporate this into your logic. So right now our trading logic is this very simple if check. And you can make it, of course, a lot more advanced by incorporating stuff like our RSI. So let's see, console log, we're logging that. Undefined, or maybe it takes a while. Let's see. Is it not called result.results? Oh yeah, oh, this took a while. This took a while. Okay. Yeah, we can see that here. Yeah, it takes a while for the RSI because it involves an average over the last period, the last few candles, and our simulation only started at one specific day, and then there was no history available because you didn't download it from Binance. So you can see the results here, and there are ways in Gecko and Gecko strategies to catch this by setting a required history. Please have a look at the documentation. I won't be going over that in this video, but you can catch that, and then you can make sure that the check function is only ran once your indicators have the required history build up, so it can actually spit out numbers, as we can see here. Yeah, so the idea is that we can say const RSI is dot result, and then now this is a number, and we can incorporate it in our checks, for example. So the last thing I want to show is I want to actually introduce a new concept, which is called trailing stops, which are new in Gecko, or people have been doing them for a long time, but they have now recently become native to Gecko, meaning that you can say whenever you go long that you want to add a stop. And in order to do that, you need to, instead of passing just a string long, you need to pass an object which has a direction. And let's actually, for the syntax, let's just have a look at the documentation. Like if you're, when you're in doubt, just go to documentation and copy. It's always the easiest. So here we can see if you can give new advice. So we have the direction already, and then here's a trigger. Okay, let's remove all the comments. We don't really want that for now. So let's set it at 1%. So I'm assuming that you're familiar with trailing stops. If you're not, in the description there's a link explaining them, because it's a bit much for this video, but the idea is that if you trigger this advice with Gecko, the first thing it will do is it will immediately buy. So in the case of simulation, do a simulated buy. And then it will say, okay, watch the price and watch it and follow it up. But once it stops going up and it stops going down, and how much down in this case is 1% below the price, then you need to sell. And that way you can actually ride the uptrend. So we don't need to sell anymore because our sell is basically baked in our trading stop in this situation. So actually we made our logic even simpler, but we had to add something to get so Gecko knows what kind of trigger you want and the parameters. Yeah, so let's run it again and see what happens. There should have been a check here. Why are there some? Oh yeah, no, actually, okay, I see. Because our trailing stop doesn't actually run on daily candles; it runs on minutely candles. So it's actually you get quite a funny result. But like, if the trend were to have been a few days, in a previous scenario, it would only have bought in the beginning, and then once the trend reverses over the daily, it would have sold. Whereas here, it's gonna basically buy every day, and then get out a few hours later, because it's the trailing stop is not adhering to this daily candle, but the minutely candle, or even less actually in real time trading bots. It's actually gonna follow the ticker. So now we get a lot more. So let's actually set it to something a little bit less crazy than 10%. Let's set it to something like 8%. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now we get a little bit less because we had a trading stop of 8%. It didn't actually sell as much. Okay, so the last thing I very quickly want to go over is I want to go over the concept of parameters. So your strategy can define some parameters. So let's go ahead and look at the documentation. And we can see, where is it? Strategy parameters. Adjust your strategy execution by creating a custom strategy parameter. So in this case, like, we're not actually using this RSI, right? So let's just remove it. So in this case, we defined our strategy as implementing two EMAs. So these are the lines that we see here. And as you can see, if you go ahead and you change these lines, wait, which one? Oh, it's over here. If you change these lines to, let's say, 30, it's going to adjust the line there. You see it, right? You see it changing as you change the number. So this is something that you might want to have a little bit more dynamic than inside here, because right now it's like hard coded inside the strategy. So what you can do with Gecko is you can say, okay, we want strategy parameters. And the way you go about it is you would go to your config and you would add a new section and you would call it config.the name of your strategy. And then you can say EMA 10 is, let's just call them something else, just so it's to show that it's completely separated. Let's call it slow, fast, 21. Yeah, and then instead of hard coding them right here, we can say this settings.slow. and this settings.
And
Not now
fast.
Gecko will actually, or your strategy will actually use the numbers that are configured right here. So now we can very simply run it. And now Gecko is simulating it. Let's actually do 48-hour candles just to speed things up a little bit. Then Gecko doesn't need to calculate as much indicators. Yeah, so as you can see here, if we run it again, we get -7%. But then if we now go and change this, so let's see, we want to change the 21 to 34, and we're going to change the 10 to 12. If we run again, we will see different results because the lines are calculated differently. And as such, the results are different. So we still lost 7%. 7.184. 184. Okay, let's just do some debugging. Is it actually passing in the correct numbers here? This settings. And another handy trick is if you want to log something and you don't want to go on after that, you can just throw something and then all execution will halt because Gecko will crash. Slow and fast. Okay. Maybe the lines are just too close to each other, so let's just bump up the numbers here. This is very strange. Yeah, okay, so because the numbers I changed were just like the lines were a little bit different, but just not different enough to actually trigger. Like if you change it from 25 to 24, like it's not really, if you look over here, it's not really going to affect. So that's what we saw. So I had to bump them up a lot more. So yeah, let's set this one to 8 and this one to 50. Let's actually set to 6. So we got a very smooth one and a little bit lagging one. Now we can see -12%. So this just goes to show not how to create very good strategies, but how you can influence your runtime behavior, meaning that if you keep this file static, you can still control the decisions it will make by tweaking these settings. And to give a practical example, Gecko comes with some default strategies. So if you have a look at the MACD one, we can see that it also uses settings, which are defined right here, config.macd. So this sample strategy has the following parameters configured. So it has a short, long signal, and these are part of the MACD indicator. And then there's a thresholds, which actually have to do with how this is how this is implemented in the MACD strategy, is that it actually looks at yeah, if the difference between the lines, it's not really the lines because it's using a MACD histogram and a MACD signal, but it's looking at if there is a difference between a line and something else is actually above some threshold, which is defined here, which is then also tweakable because it's defined here. Okay, so to go back to our moon example, we have our moon parameters defined here. So the last thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to run our moon through the interface. So let's start up our interface again. And if we now we can say go ahead, we can go to backtest. We can select our data set, which is the only one we have, and we can say we want to run moon, which is our cool strategy, and we want to set it to 1 day, right? That's what we said. And let's do 0 warm up for now. And if we run this, it's most likely going to crash. Yeah, it crashed. And it says Gecko was unable to configure the tulip indicator. Opt-in time period needs to be a number. So let's have a look at our strategy. Opt-in time period needs to be a number, but that's strange because we have the settings So let's log these settings to see what happens. And let's run it again. Empty. Oh no, this is not good. Okay, so what went wrong here is that when you're running in the UI, Gecko isn't actually using any config file. Well, it is, but it's building one. So we need to make sure that we pass the parameters we need. We make sure that they end up in the UI. And the way to do that is to go to the config directory, go to strategies, and create a new file. We're going to call it moon.toml. And toml is kind of like JSON. So we're basically just going to say they were called slow and fast. Slow is 10 and then fast is 21. We're going to save it. And now, unfortunately, we need to restart the UI. So let's go ahead and close this. Restart the UI. And now if we go to backtest, we select the dataset and we select moon here, it's going to pre-fill whatever we put in this little file here in moon.toml. So this allows it that we can easily change these numbers over here without, and then changing the backtest or changing how the strategy will run without changing the numbers. But yeah, let's go ahead and run backtest. As you can see, it's not crashing anymore. And we can see the minus 22% that we have over the hourly. So let's set it to 1 daily. And run it again without any warm up. We have minus 7%. Yeah, and here we can see a chart of the price, and the green dots and indicate buys and the red dots indicate sells. Keep in mind, this is the old UI. I'm working on a new one. So by the time you watch this video, Gecko might already have the new one, which visualizes it a little bit differently. The chart will look like this, where the blue line represents the market and the green line represents the value of your portfolio, which moves at the market as soon as you buy, as soon as you're in a round trip, but doesn't as soon as you sell, because then that's when you move back into dollars. And then here, this is a better visualization, so to say. It's not out at this moment, but it will be very soon. So by the time you watch this video, check the description for the current status on this UI. But for now, we have to do with this one. So yeah, we can now change this number and we should get a different result. So now we have minus 7.5. With 100, I'm actually not actually sure if it's going to trigger, but let's see. It did. Oh, it triggered a few times. Oh, it was able to write this trend quite good, but unfortunately still lost money. Yeah, so that's basically it. Some final notes. Gecko is undergoing a lot of changes, so by the time you've seen this video, not everything might be correct anymore about how you add indicators, for example, or how you look at the results in the command line. So please check the description for the latest status, as it's a very much project under development. Also with the new UI, which is coming out very soon. So by the time you're trying this out, you might be using the new UI. And one other final note is if you like creating strategies and if you're good at creating strategies, then definitely subscribe to this channel and watch out for my next video, which I will be publishing very soon, about a contest I will do where everyone can create a strategy and they can all upload them to my upcoming service called Gecko Plus. And I will evaluate the strategies in real time. And then the winner, or the strategy that performs the best, will be able to win a prize in crypto. So if you're interested in that, definitely watch out for more follow-up content. So I hope you enjoyed it. Ciao.